Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Troy Fullerton, and I want to talk a little bit tonight about how the Latin language evolved into the Romance languages and why this doesn't seem to be occurring today the way that it did back then. Well, in the first place, when Latin got taken all over the place by the Roman Empire, most of the people at the time could not read or write. There were scribes in villages who could, but most people weren't. Most people were not educated at the time, and so most people were not speaking classical scholarly Latin the way that you would learn it if you were to study Latin in college. Instead, they were speaking what we call vulgar Latin. Now, vulgar Latin simply means the common Latin of the people, meaning, it wasn't necessarily always correct. But what would happen is wherever the Latin language was taken, the people in that area would run into people who spoke other languages. And they would adopt some of their words, some of their phraseology, particularly if they were describing geographical features, animals, foods, plants, things that they didn't already have a word for. Now, when they would do this, they would adopt new words to one extent or another, and their language would be changed, it would be tweaked by whatever language was already being spoken there, where they were imposing Latin, and also by other people that came in bands later on. Now, when that would happen, people in neighboring communities would still be able to understand each other, but the further they got from each other, the more things changed. Realize at the time there was no printing press. There was no internet. There were no computers. There were books were scarce, usually in scrolls. People really had nothing to keep their language standard from one geographical region to another. So if they were separated by distance, waterways, mountains, etc., eventually, as hundreds of years would go by, they would wind up speaking in such a disparate way that they could no longer understand each other. Eventually, people realized, you know what? We're not really all speaking Latin anymore. My Latin doesn't sound like the language that they speak in France. My Latin doesn't sound like the language they speak in Italy or in Romania or in Portugal. Instead, what we now have is all of these Romance languages. And now you know a little bit about why it's not happening to that extent now.